Hello, and welcome to this month's Urban and Community IPM webinar. I'm Lindsay Hack, an invasive species educator for UC IPM. We are excited to have Constance Taylor and Jutta Berger from the California Invasive Plant Council, also called Cal-IPC, presenting today. Constance Taylor is a staff conservation specialist at Cal-IPC with over 15 years of experience providing naturalist outreach and adult-centered education. Jutta Berger is Cal-IPC's science director. Her interests lie in understanding invasiveness from a biological, ecological, and evolutionary perspective, and in preserving our native ecosystems by properly prioritizing and implementing invasive control, developing native seed resources, and facilitating restoration. She previously served as Cal-IPC's president and as board secretary. Thank you for joining us, Constance and Jutta. You may now share your slides and begin.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We are excited to be here. I'm going to share my slides. Okay. So today, for the next 50 minutes, we are going to be focusing on managing invasive plants and specifically tips and tools for everyday use. So we are going to go over some online tools as well as some really important concepts that hopefully you will be able to take with you and use anywhere that it's relevant, whether you are doing environmental restoration or home gardening or landscaping. So for today, our main points, I'm going to go over a little bit of an introduction for California Invasive Plant Council, for those of you who are not familiar with our organization, as well as some basics about invasive plant ecology, like defining some terms and concepts, just so we're all on the same page for the next hour. Then I'm going to go over some site hygiene principles, meaning basic ways to prevent the spread of invasive plants. And then how invasive plants are managed on a state level, which I think is super interesting and I didn't really know a whole lot about before I started working for Cal-IPC. I'm also going to go over some tools and resources for invasive plant ID and management. Jutta's going to go over some early detection rapid response principles as well as specific plants, and then we'll close with some final thoughts. So feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A, and one of us will get to you. So a brief intro about Cal-IPC. We are a nonprofit established in 1992. And we are a very small staff. We have 5 full-time employees and 3 part-time employees to cover the entire state of California. So invasive plant issues from northern to southern California. And also we often partner with other Western states to collaborate, information and responses and resources. So we stay very busy. And our mission at Cal-IPC is to protect California's lands and waters from ecologically damaging invasive plants through science, education, and policy. And we primarily focus on wildland weed management in natural areas and not so much agricultural or urban weed management. Those are different use case scenarios. However, there is a lot of overlapping information between all of those. But just keep in mind that our general focus is invasive plants in wildland areas. And so since we are such a small staff, we Cal-IPC folks are not literally the people going out into the field and removing the weeds, nor are we a regulatory agency. We provide lots of tools and resources to help people who are doing this work out there. And we help grease the wheels and smooth the path for other organizations around the state to do the on-the-ground work. So some of the ways we do this is by coordinating regional partnerships. That's a really big one because I'm sure we are all painfully aware weeds do not recognize county lines. So it's really important that we are all working together to manage areas and invasive species in areas. We help land managers prioritize resources for species management. There is always, always, always very limited time, money, and personnel to manage invasive plants. So given this, it's really important that we think about what species we are focusing on, given the resources that we have, so we can get the maximum benefits in the ecosystems that we're working in. We also design science-based tools and projects to remove invasive plants. And these are some of the tools that we're going to be going over today and showing you. We advocate for sound public policy and funding. So a lot of the money that restoration projects get around the state come from federal and state funding, which means that this is funding that might be competing with every other possible priority that state and federal governments are dealing with. So we work with policymakers in Sacramento and beyond to make sure that our elected representatives understand the importance of healthy ecosystems and along with that invasive species management to positive ecological health and human health. And then finally, we train volunteers and professional land stewards. So trainings can look a lot like what we're doing today. They can also be more ongoing hands-on trainings when we're partnered with different organizations on perhaps different projects like workforce development or a specific type of plant. And we also have our annual symposium, which I will talk about in the next slide. So our symposium is a major event that we host annually, and the theme this year is Beyond Eradication, Resistance, Resilience, and Recovery. And this year, we're going to be focusing on land stewardship approaches that go beyond just invasive plant removal by promoting things like ecological resistance to invasion and resilience to changing conditions and recovery from major events like wildfire. And a lot of these sessions are also going to highlight strategies for strengthening habitat health while also addressing the human dimensions of adaptability and conservation. So it's going to be happening both in Ventura and online. It's going to be simultaneous, November 12th to the 15th, and it's an opportunity for volunteers, for interested parties, for federal agencies, for state agencies, for private and public organizations to come and share and discuss all things weed management in the state of California and beyond. So it's a really fantastic opportunity. If you're interested in joining, I really recommend you come. And we have this resource list for you today that will be emailed to you later. And just so you're not kind of frantically scribbling down URLs or whatever else, this is a PDF link and all of these links are active. So you can just click on any of these things and it'll take you right to the web pages that I will be showing you today. And there's also a couple little extra tidbits in there as well that we're not going to have time to go over today, but I thought you might be interested in knowing about anyway. So you will get that later. Alrighty, so here we go. Our first section, a little bit of invasive plant background. So, I'm sure you've heard these terms thrown around before. We've got invasive, introduced, native, and weed. So what do all of these things mean and what's the difference? So the invasive plant here, we've got English ivy crawling all over the ground, up the trees. So invasive plants are plants that quickly reproduce and spread. They change habitats. They reduce biodiversity, they can cause extinctions, they can increase fire hazards, and they are non-native and introduced. So, begs the question, what exactly is an introduced plant? So here I've got a picture of some rosemary. Introduced means that it is not from the place that it has been brought into. Rosemary is European. It's been brought into the area through human activity. Meaning plants generally cannot move purely by themselves or through, animal transportation across, say, mountain ranges or across entire oceans. But humans are really amazing at traveling fast and far and bringing lots of stuff with us. So generally speaking, introduced plants tend to be brought in through human activity and not through other means like wind, water, getting stuck on animal fur or bird poop or things like that. They can certainly be spread that way, but generally they're not going to cross a mountain range or an ocean like that. So introduced plants are not always invasive. The rosemary, for example, tends to stay where it's planted. It's a really common landscaping and gardening plant, but it's not going to take over if you leave it untended. You're not going to go out into a wild land like a grassland or a forest and see a field of feral rosemary. That's just not really how it acts. So non-native just means the opposite of a native plant also. So what exactly is a native plant? We have here one of our iconic coast live oaks. A native plant has evolved in the area over a long period of time. So this is a plant that has relationships with the insects, with the birds, with the fungus, bacteria, all of these other organisms that it has lived with for a very, very long time. And in California, native usually means plants and animals that were here before European arrival, say like the 1500s to 1700s. And I should really amend that to say in North America, native usually means plants and animals that were here before European arrival. And it means different things in different places. There might be a different definition of native in, say, Europe, where they've had a very different history of people traveling around. And then what's a weed? We have here our beautiful native California poppy, our state flower, growing out of a crack in a sidewalk, which we might not want. So a weed is just a plant out of place. It's growing where its presence conflicts with human goals, desires, or needs. If you've ever grown California poppies, you will know that they are aggressive growers, even though they are native. And if you've got a bunch of poppies growing in your vegetable garden where you don't want them, you might call it a weed. What exactly makes a plant invasive? So this can be a very complex answer that depends on multiple factors, including biotic and abiotic factors in the environment. And biotic just means living, so things like fungus, bacteria, insects, birds, plants. And abiotic means non-living, so things like soil chemistry, water, sunlight, slope, things like that. And you might hear in, say, master gardeners or other gardening worlds or landscaping worlds, right plant, right place. And this can be a double-edged sword when we are talking about ecosystems and invasive plants. Generally speaking, right plant, right place refers to only the plant and not necessarily the plant's impacts on the ecosystem it's in. So one of the things about invasive plants is many of them were brought over because they're beautiful and people wanted to landscape with them, and they not only survived but thrived in these garden environments. So they thrived so well that they started spreading into areas where they started causing problems. So it's really important to consider the, invasiveness factor of the plants that you're putting in your gardens and in our landscapes as well. Because the plant might do great, but it might be bad for everything else. What makes a plant invasive? Well, I said that it was complicated, but they do often have a few of these characteristics in common. So invasive plants often tolerate a wide range of environmental conditions. They can grow in sunny areas or in shady areas, in salty soil, in freshwater soil. They can reproduce rapidly, and they also have rapid growth. This is one of the reasons that annual grasses are such a intense invasive, because they have their entire sprout, growth, reproduction cycle all in 1 year. It happens very quickly and they can overwhelm other plants in the area. Invasive plants generally have high seed production and the seeds can disperse easily, either on wind, water, or animal fur. They cause negative effects in ecosystems like a decrease in biodiversity, so they outcompete other vegetation. And their spread, like I said before, is connected to humans and human activity. So here's a couple common ways that invasive plants have been introduced in new areas, new continents. So it can happen intentionally. So gardening and landscaping trade has brought in lots and lots of invasive plants. English ivy, broom, which is the top right photo here, pampas grass, which is that middle photo. These were all brought over because they're really pretty and people wanted to decorate their houses with them. Cultivated food plants like fennel, artichoke, and cereal rye, also highly invasive, brought over intentionally for food. Unintentionally, plants have gotten here through ballast in ships. I don't know if you're familiar with ballast. I'll try to explain it quickly. When shipping containers come in, they generally are loaded down with lots of cargo. When you offload that cargo and that bottom space is empty, that is dangerous because that means the ship sits higher in the water. So historically, people would fill that empty space with soil, rocks, gravel in order to weigh the ship down until it got to the next port. The ship would get to the next port, all that soil and rock would be unloaded to make space for cargo, And that soil and rock would have all kinds of seeds and weed propagules in it and soil pathogens that would get spread to the next port. Another unintentional way these things have been spread are through contaminants in other products like hay and gravel and filler rock, and also things like packing materials. Stilt grass is a problem in lots of different areas, not necessarily in California, but definitely parts of Europe because of the porcelain trade that was happening from China to Europe in, I believe, like the 1700s. So still a problem today. So once these plants have been introduced into the new continent, how exactly do they spread once they are here? So this unfortunately is this is the really like easy and devilishly hard way to manage invasive plants sometimes because they spread once they're here really, really easily because they can spread on things like transportation. So if you've got dirty tires, dirty construction equipment, and you're going from one site to the next and there's dirt all over your equipment, you can be spreading weeds and soil pathogens from place to place as you go. Same thing with recreation. If you've got dirty hiking boots, dirty clothing, dirty mountain biking tires, dirty off-road vehicle tires, that can spread weeds and soil disease from place to place as well. In the nursery trade, the plants themselves can be invasive. It is not illegal to sell things like Scotch broom and English ivy in nurseries. You can go to Home Depot and buy some right now. So the plants themselves can be invasive, and the soil could be contaminated with other weed seeds or with soil diseases. And then, like I mentioned before, contaminated materials like hay, rock, soil, and gravel. So we have on the right here some pictures of, seeds stuck all over pants, dirty shovels, plants in pots that could be harboring weeds and soil disease. So it's very important to practice site hygiene. This is one of the small but extremely mighty ways to prevent invasive seed and soil pathogen spread. And I like to make a point of this because it's something that a lot of folks don't know about. I didn't really know about it before I started working in the invasive plant world. So it's a really simple concept that can have a huge impact. So what exactly is site hygiene? It's essentially everyday practices that reduce the risk of accidentally spreading things that cause damage to ecosystems, such as invasive plants and other weeds or soil-borne diseases. So, just like we wash our hands after we go to the bathroom to prevent disease spread or brush our teeth every day to prevent tooth decay, gum disease, soil hygiene is just one of those things that if we integrate it into our lives regularly, we can actually prevent all of these long-term problems. So how do we do this? How do we site hygiene? We do it, unsurprisingly, by keeping things clean. So that essentially means scraping and then spraying. So first you want to brush the dirt off your shoes and tools, and then you spray it with a 70% rubbing alcohol spray before you leave a site. And that could be if you're, gardening at your home garden and then you're going to go volunteer at a garden somewhere else. Before you leave your home garden, scrape your shoes, spray off your tools, and then take your shoes and tools to the next place. And it's a 70% rubbing alcohol, which is just the stuff that you can buy at the drugstore. And you want to use 70% and not 90%. The 70% has a higher water content, which prevents the alcohol from evaporating too quickly. So if you use a 90%, the alcohol will evaporate too quickly, which means it will not stay in contact with the soil pathogen for long enough to kill it. So the 70% is great. You also want to remove seeds from your clothing, including your shoes and in your shoelaces. And if something is really dirty at a site, then clean it as best you can before you leave the site and clean it more thoroughly when you get home. You also want to beware of contaminated soil and potted plants and other introduced materials. So the catchphrase is arrive clean, leave clean. Because prevention is key. There's this astonishing statistic that is, we can reduce the spread of weeds and soil disease by 99% just by getting things reasonably clean. It doesn't need to be spotless. You don't need to be able to eat your dinner off of your shovel. It just needs to be reasonably clean. And here's some great resources from Play Clean Go. If you're looking for more information, highly recommend you check them out. It's a project of the North American Invasive Species Management Association, and they have lots of public outreach campaign materials to stop or slow spread of invasive species. So this is it. Arrive clean, leave clean. Make site hygiene part of your routine. Nowadays I just keep a spray bottle of alcohol and a boot brush in my car, and I use it all the time. Okay, so on to our next topic of the day, which is how are invasive plants managed on a statewide level? There are essentially three different ways that this is done. And this is through the California Department of Food and Agriculture, through weed management areas, and through us, Cal-IPC. And I'm going to walk you through these one by one. So for CDFA, they really focus on preventing or restricting the movement of pests and pathogens that affect commercial agriculture. That is their primary concern. Their primary concern is not necessarily how these plants affect wildlands and ecosystems. A primary mandate of CDFA is to protect against invasion of exotic pests and diseases. So they do this in a number of ways. There are checkpoints. There's also the Report a Pest hotline phone number, which if you go to the CDFA website, this phone number is plastered all over their website. It's very, very easy to find. So if you happen to see something that you want to report, you can call this number and report it. And CDFA is relatively flexible. When they get a call about something, they can look into it and do things like try to reduce the flow of it through commerce. And so that's either through commercial checkpoints like at ports, or it is through the checkpoints that are set up along highways that you might have passed through when you're coming into the state. And so at that checkpoint, they're looking for things like pathogens, they're looking for fruit and other live materials, they're looking for things that have a quarantine on them. So citrus is often something that you cannot bring into the state. It will likely be confiscated at the state border. And it really depends a lot on what and where the most recent pest is. And CDFA is involved in this whole host of programs to increase education and awareness around invasive species. And it's not just plants, but any type of invasive organism. Insects are a big one too, like the Buy It Where You Burn It campaign for firewood. So, not moving firewood from place to place because that can transport things like invasive insects and fungus and other pathogens. So unfortunately, for all of these things, there is not much enforcement and a lot of the action is voluntary. For example, it is not illegal to move firewood, it is just strongly discouraged. And like I mentioned before, invasive plants are still sold in nurseries because it's not necessarily, if it's not a plant that affects agriculture, then it doesn't have the same restrictions on it. So this can be really frustrating in the invasive plant world when you spend lots and lots of money removing French broom from an area and then you go to the nearest Home Depot and they've got, plants and plants for sale of what you just removed. So that is an issue as far as the voluntary part. Private land can also be a really big challenge. CDFA doesn't have the authority to tell private landowners what to do and what to remove. What they can do, however, is provide local and regional funding if there's a need for action. So they do have some money that they can give to groups doing work to eradicate different invasive plants. The public can also report things, like I said, through the pest hotline and your local agricultural commissioner. So if you want to find your local ag commissioner, just Google the name of your county and then agricultural commissioner, and a name will pop up. You can give them a call. There's also the encyclopedia on the CDFA website. Again, if this is a link on the resource page, but you can just Google encyclopedia CDFA, it'll pop right up. This has a list of noxious weeds in California called the California Noxious Weed List. And this is primarily focused on agriculture, again, so they're not going to list things that are highly invasive in wildlands. And you might notice two different ratings on the weed list. So there's the CDFA weed pest ratings, which are A, B, and C. And then there's also the 4,500 weeds, which are also listed on the encyclopedia. All that means is that any plant on either of these weeds are open to being regulated. So there might be some restriction on their movement into the state. There might be some restriction on whether or not they can be sold in the state, things like that. All right. So moving on to weed management areas. So the WMA program is statewide, but it is mostly county-based. And these WMA groups are periodically funded by the state through CDFA. And unfortunately, this program was defunded for about a decade, but they have started getting some funding around 2020, but there is a lot of bureaucracy and red tape involved in that, unfortunately. But there are many WMAs that are doing amazing things in the areas where they operate. So these WMAs are made up of various stakeholders that are all focused on invasive plant control in some way. And these are private landowners, county agencies, state agencies, federal agencies, nonprofit agencies. And it's everybody working together to focus on a regional response to make sure that resources are being used in the most efficient way, that information is being shared, all of those things. And Cal-IPC hosts the annual WMA meeting, which happens generally around our annual symposium time. And they are free to join. So if you are interested in sitting in on one of these meetings and joining, the next one is happening November 12th, 2025 from 8:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Online and free to join. And on the resource page, there is a link to this calipc.org WMA URL, and that is where you will find more information about joining. Oh, I did want to show you one thing real quick. How do you find your WMA? So this is what the page looks like. Oh, you can register for the meeting right here at this link. And if you want to find the WMA in your region, you go down to this area here, and it'll show you countywide all the different WMAs. Click on it, find the contact information, and get in touch with folks that way. And finally, Cal-IPC. So we are a statewide hub. Like I was mentioning before, we connect people concerned about invasive plants to each other and fill in gaps by providing risk and invasiveness ratings for introduced plants in natural areas. And so we provide information on management in these natural areas, including resources that can help managers prioritize plants with limited time and resources. Like I was mentioning before, Cal Weed Mapper is not something that I'm going to go over today, but it is a link on your resource list. This is a really cool map that will show you where different weeds have been spotted and what has been done management-wide for those populations. We also have the plant inventory, which I'll be going over in just a minute, and this is the go-to list for park managers. So the plants on the inventory are plants that are known to be invasive or suspected to be invasive in wildlands. For each plant, there's going to be resources linked to manage this particular species, and it's very transparent. You can see the individuals who did the full assessment, you can see when it was done, you can see when it was updated. And then we also do things like develop best management practices for weed control, and that is at the species level. So how do I best get rid of French broom, as well as technique? How do I best tarp or burn or dig? Things like that. And I'll show you that in a second as well. So that brings me to some of the tools and resources on the Cal-IPC website. So I just wanted to show you these three things: the Cal-IPC library, the plant inventory, and weed cut. So the library has loads and loads of information. You just go to our webpage, resources, publication video library. We've got so much stuff here. We've got manuals, reports, books, brochures, invasive species ID cards. These can be great for volunteer days if you want to give volunteers like a quick printout of things to look for whatever species you are removing. We've got lots of training videos, presentations, all kinds of other resources. I encourage you to dig through that. There's lots of fun stuff in there. We also have our symposium archive, which you can find a link right here. And this will literally give you presentations, recordings, abstracts, slideshows, going all the way back to 1995. So really a fantastic resource of stuff there. So I had mentioned the inventory. That can be found under plants right here. So there are three things you'll see: plants A to Z, plants in horticulture, and the Cal-IPC inventory. The content in the inventory and plants A to Z are the exact same. The difference is plants A to Z has pictures and the inventory is text only. And I'll show you that in a second. The plants in horticulture list is an excerpt from our main inventory list, and these are plants that have primarily come from the horticulture and landscape areas. So everything in plants and horticulture is going to be in the inventory and plants A to Z. It's just sort of, it's pulled out for you already. So this is what plants A to Z looks like. It just has thumbnails of everything. And then if you click on something, it is going to take you to more information, which I'll show you in a minute. The inventory is the exact same plants, but it's in a slightly different format. This is also a downloadable list if you want to, if you need to download it for whatever reason. And then plants and horticulture, again, this is the excerpts. So I will just show you, let's see, let's look up fennel. We'll just go to fennel. So you click on any of those things in those 3 inventory lists, you're going to get to something like this, the plant assessment form. And this is going to be the, transparent, show you who looked at it, when it was last updated. I'm not really going to focus on this. I want to focus on the plant profile. So this, I think, is what's going to be most useful for most folks. It's going to have a little bit of natural history. This is the assessment form that we just came from. This is the species ID card. So what I was talking about on the resources and library list, great for volunteer days. And weed management notes. This is something that you're definitely going to want to look at. I'll click there in a sec. And then we've got, lots and lots of articles and resources about fennel that you can click through to, as well as some photos. So let's look at weed management notes. Here, you're going to get a little bit more information natural history-wise, and this is really the good stuff. The non-chemical controls, how do you get rid of this plant? So best practices for that. You can see there's different ways to do it, mechanical, cultural, or biological. And then also it's going to give you chemical control methods. What will work best on fennel if you want to use chemicals. So I really recommend looking through this if you have a specific plant that you're focused on. And another resource, the last one I'm going to show you, is Weed Cut. So to be clear, Weed Cut is actually a resource made for land managers. So don't be overwhelmed. But it is, there's a lot of really useful information for home gardening and landscaping as well. And some of that great stuff is here in management practices. So you can, pick your activity, non-chemical, biological, or herbicidal control. And there is also, here we go. So you can check that there. And then you can also select your management practice by plant species. So say you want to manage Tree of Heaven here. So this is going to tell you what the best methods are to use for non-chemical and chemical practices. So top results are stump grinding and tarping. And then it'll take you to fair results, poor or ineffective results, and then give you herbicide options as well. So if you're going to learn a little more about tarping, you want to see what's going on here, you can click on tarping, and this will give you a little snapshot. So what is it going to work best on? The cost, the environmental hazard, the fire risk, the safety risk, and then it's going to give you lots and lots and lots of information over here. So you can just, these are just quick links here to different parts of the document. So, how to use it. It'll give you detailed information. So I've actually used this particular page on tarping for managing weeds in my backyard, so I can attest that it is very useful for the home gardener. Other resources that are really fantastic are, of course, the UCIPM site. This is another link that's on the resource list. This has just all kinds of quick links and great information for not only the use context, so are you trying to do weed management in landscapes, in lawns? Are you trying to manage woody weeds, as well as individuals? And lots of information here, identifying weeds, other info. So that's another great resource. Whoopsie. And if you are considering planting something and you're not sure if it's invasive or it's invasive, I recommend going to PlantRight. They have a list of what not to plant as well as suggestions for what to plant instead. And they really focus on the worst invasive plants being sold in horticultural businesses. So they're not going to have every single invasive horticultural plant on here. It's just sort of the top 7, I believe, but it's a really useful resource. And if you are interested in getting more involved with things like this, PlantRight does a nursery survey regularly, often annually, and you can get involved and they'll train you up and you go into different nurseries and just sort of see what's being sold, what's invasive, what's still being sold that's invasive that we already know about, or any new invasive plants that might have made their way into the nursery trade. So you can email info@plantright.org if you want more information. Other useful resources, UC Master Gardeners, of course. I'm sure there are some Master Gardeners in the audience today. Great resource for invasive plants. CalFlora has different maps and information, including bloom time, lots of photos as well. The California Invasive Plants Facebook page, which is, privately run Facebook page. You can join. You can group source information for, I have this weed that's causing problems in my yard. Can somebody tell me what they've done about it and kind of get, people's opinions and ideas for how you might manage this. And it's not necessarily professionals, it's people who have, tried different things. So it is, publicly sourced information. And then iNaturalist and Seek. And we really recommend iNaturalist for logging instances of where you are seeing weeds and mapping those photos because land managers do use iNaturalist to see where weeds are and where they're spreading to. All right, now I'm going to pass it over to Jutta to talk a little about EDRR.
Thanks, Constance. I will apologize to the person I was writing to because I'm mid-sentence on answering a question. So thanks, that was great. So what is EDRR? So this is a really important part of understanding and dealing with invasive species in general, invasive plants in particular. So early detection, rapid response, if you ever wonder when you hear that acronym. It is a strategy that is focused on finding and removing new invasive species before they establish and spread. So, we have this overwhelming number of invasive species that are in the state. We often feel a little bit like out of control with how many there are and the kind of effects that they have. But if we get to those species that are coming in early, the small populations that are coming in before they spread widely, that's the best and most efficient place to be able to be effective at your control. So we all try to focus folks on this EDRR component. It does rely on people being able to identify the pest that they're going after, the plant, the new weed, and that's oftentimes a little bit of a challenge. So tools like the ones that Constance showed, as well as, these mapping, and she also showed some of that, mapping programs and ID assistance program, AI tools and things like that can help more these days, as well as specialists, people that you can talk to ID correctly a new weed that's come into your area, and then to respond quickly. That's very important. Another really important thing is mapping those plants so that other people know that plant is in that location. And if you map something and add a picture using a mapping tool like iNaturalist or CalFlora, then you can actually have somebody else sort of check your work a little bit. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, it's a little bit overwhelming, dealing with the number of invasive species and specifically invasive plants that we have in the state. But a good place to start, if you'd like to get to know what maybe the problem species are in this early detection, rapid response category in your region, a great place to start is this guide that was printed. It was compiled and printed in late 2021, and it takes all of California and it divides it into these 19 different regions that are either one or more of these weed management areas, the WMAs that Constance mentioned, and it looks at the species how many species and which species in each of those regions are less than 10% of the USGS quads are they occupying, so they're not very well highly distributed, and that is that species also being worked on by people. So we compiled all the species in all these different areas, and this what I'm showing you here is a summary table of those for each of those 19 areas. There's a link to that document in the slide of links, and it's called Regional Plant EDRR Targets. So I'd recommend you go there, just if you want an intro to some early detection species in your area that you live that would be maybe important to document and to help fight. Next one, please. So one example is there's a region called we call it the Bay Area, the larger Bay Area. It's comprised of 9 counties in the greater San Francisco Bay. And this list here is the summary table for just that San Francisco Bay Area. So there are a bunch of species there. Again, they all take up less than 10% of the USGS quads, and either the Agricultural Commissioner's Office or the weed management area in a whole, or both of them together in collaboration. Sometimes they're one and the same thing. They are working on the control or the containment of those species. So one example. So again, for each of those 19 areas, there's a table like this. Next slide. So I can't really give you examples, very meaningful, comprehensive examples, because, we're talking, you are an audience of across the whole state of California. But I just put one species for Southern California that's on that list, one for Central and one for Northern. So Southern California, again, just an example, there's like a zillion, other ones, or not quite a zillion, but a manageable number otherwise. Canary Island, St. John's wort. So this is a big shrub, and it has it is showing signs of spreading, of being able to spread. And there's a lot of different groups that are working on containing, controlling, and eliminating populations of this species, especially in coastal Southern California. So this gets into shrubland impacts, our coastal sage scrub habitats. The next one is spotted knapweed. Spotted knapweed is a really bad plant, and it is a perennial. It spreads very easily, and it's highly competitive in grasslands and rangelands. And it has been, as you can see, listed as a high Cal-IPC rating and noxious rating as well. And it's definitely a priority in the central part of California. Not so much, and this is where distribution is so important, and knowing the distribution. It's not one of the species that's been listed for several of the Northern California regions because it's already out of the barn out there, but it's moving southward. So in the central area, people think that they can still contain it, keep it from spreading further as an EDRR species. Same thing, the same species is listed for Southern California. So a third species, one for Northern California, is Japanese knotweed. Japanese knotweed is a horrendously difficult plant that grows in riparian areas. It's a perennial, it has rhizomatous growth. It can spread by tiny fragments of these rhizomes subsurface, and because it's right next to streams, it can be transported very easily. This was originally introduced as an ornamental, just like Canary Island, St. John's wort was. So for Northern California, where there's a little bit more water, this needs a little bit more water, this particular plant is not yet very common, is known to be horrendous, and is an early detection rapid response species. So that's just an example of how you can kind of familiarize yourself and focus your efforts on EDRR species. So next slide. Lastly, I just wanted to go back and emphasize how you can help with this, with early detection rapid response species. You can go, learn about some of these species from that guide, from our inventory, from the pest notes that UC IPM has. Record your new finds in CalFlora or INAT, and just participate in learning more about the plants that are around you and the ones that are problems. Get help when you need it with identifications. Oftentimes we miss information about new plants coming in because people felt shy about getting a plant verified. And then get involved with sharing information by talking with people, with joining your weed management area, master gardener groups, sharing that information when you all meet, CNPS chapters, bring a sample to your ag commissioner's office. Tell us about it, that we're happy to get information and notes like that from you. So we have some tips on how to map in this link that we have below, but we also have, again, that information in the sheet that we sent to you all. So I think that's it. I'm going to pass it back to Constance for some final thoughts.
Yes. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jutta. So just some takeaways, things to remember, because I know we covered a lot of information. The number one thing is invasive plant management starts at home. So remembering that ornamental plants can be invasive, and invasive plants, pests, and pathogens can spread very easily from homes and plant nurseries into wildlands. And remember the site hygiene motto: arrive clean, leave clean. So that includes things like plants, boots, tools, and other materials like gravel or even wood. There are lots of resources available to help you identify and manage invasive plants in home and garden settings or in wildlands. Most of the resources that Cal-IPC had, like I said, is for land managers, but obviously lots and lots of overlap for home use as well. And I encourage, again, everybody to come to the symposium. It's a great place to learn more about what's going on in the state and where you live. And the final thing, prevention and EDRR are the best ways to handle invasive plants, because once populations establish, they are really hard and really expensive and maybe impossible to get rid of. So prevention and EDRR are really, really what we emphasize, because it is the most cost-effective and the most and the best way to prevent weeds from taking over areas. And so if you have any questions for us, I just realized I spelled inquiries wrong. Whoops. You can email us at our general hotline at info@calipc.org, and you can also email us individually at these emails here. So thank you all so much for your attention. I really appreciate you spending your afternoon with us. And I will pass it back over to UCIPM for further instruction.
Thank you so much, Constance and Jutta, for that great presentation.